3 chilling true au pair horror tales. At the age of 20, I arrived in the United States, embarking on my journey as an au pair. I lacked experience, yet I was filled with eagerness, though I felt quite nervous as well. I'd grown up in a small town in France and hadn't ever spent time away from home, let alone across an ocean. I still had some areas to improve in my English, but I felt confident enough to manage. I expected it to be a good year, a new adventure, a cultural exchange, something I tell my friend about when I went home. I was paired with the Joseph family. For privacy reasons, I prefer not to disclose the specific town, but it was situated in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. Tranquil avenues, charming residences, spacious gardens, the sort of neighborhood where one might anticipate well-mannered children, dedicated PDA mothers, and fathers who toiled tirelessly. I remember being so relieved when I first arrived. I believed this would be straightforward. Nothing negative occurs in locations such as this. The Josephs were blessed with 2 sons, Brock and Brandon. Brock, the elder sibling, was 12 years old. He was an ordinary kid, a bit lazy at times, occasionally rude, but ultimately harmless. He cracked jokes, enjoyed his Xbox, and generally kept himself out of trouble. Brandon, however, stood apart. At just 9 years old, he already possessed a certain coldness about him. I don't know how else to describe it. Something felt amiss. It seems probable that he may have experienced some form of social disorder. Upon our initial encounter, he simply gazed at me in silence, unfazed and unashamed. He simply gazed at me as if he were analyzing every detail. After a brief pause, he grinned and inquired, "Are you the maid?" I chuckled nervously and mentioned that I would be assisting in taking care of him and his brother throughout the year. He didn't share a laugh with me. He merely continued to observe. It quickly became clear that Brandon stood apart from the other kids. My host parents cautioned me that he was challenging. They claimed he had a touch of an attitude. But that was the understatement of the century. Brandon possessed more than just an attitude. He was cruel. And I don't refer to the typical childish antics like mocking his brother or turning his nose up at his meals. It was even more dire than that. He was perpetually dishonest, fabricating tales about all matters. He once informed his teacher that Brock attempted to choke him in the kitchen, an event that never actually took place. He told the neighbor that his parents locked him in a closet at night. He even mentioned that the previous au pair fled because of him and that she was never seen again. As I attempted to reprimand him for his actions, he squinted his eyes and retorted, "Don't instruct me on what to do." Everything was under control for me, even at that moment. But I must confess that I felt a bit afraid of him. From that point onwards, the situation deteriorated further. One night, roughly 2 months in, I drew back my sheets and froze. Thumbtacks were strewn across my mattress. I simply gazed for a moment. Countless, perhaps 100, were gesturing skyward, anticipating for me to recline. My heart began to race. The mattress cover was riddled with tiny punctures all over. I stood there in fear, realizing how close I'd come to lying on them. Brandon had been observing me earlier that day. I noticed him sneaking a glance through a narrow gap in the door while I was busy folding laundry. I never considered. Much of it at the time, I just thought he was being nosy. But after seeing all those thumbtacks, my certainty began to waver. I was truly terrified. I was reluctant to inform his parents, fearing they might send me back to France. So I tidied up the disarray and held it in. Following that, events grew increasingly peculiar. Brandon began to trail me throughout the house. I would catch him glancing around corners, observing me from the doorways. At times, when I found myself, whether I was cooking or reading, I would glance up to see him sitting across the room, his gaze fixed and unblinking. I didn't say a word. I have to confess, I did my best to steer clear of him as much as possible due to my apprehension. One afternoon, I was tending to the flowers in the garden when an unusual scent caught my attention. A pungent, acrid scent reminiscent of decay. I followed the signs to a corner of the yard where the earth appeared recently turned over. Driven by curiosity, I took hold of a small garden shovel and began to prod the earth. Upon witnessing what lay before me, I was on the verge of scream. 3 lifeless rabbits lay interred in that spot. Their forms were contorted and marred in numerous areas. One was bound at the legs with string. I hurried inside to share the news with my host parents. Initially, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph appeared worried, but they soon took Brandon aside to inquire about the situation. He offered a guileless expression and claimed it wasn't his doing, and that was all there was to it. They had faith in him. Mrs. Joseph mentioned that it was likely one of the local residents. The children instructed Brandon to return indoors. After that, I began to sleep with my bedroom door locked. A week later, I found myself roused from sleep in the dead of night by a sound echoing through my room. I awoke to find a shadow lurking by my bedside. It was Brandon. He stood there, grasping an object. I blinked several times and came to understand what it was. A culinary blade. I let out a piercing scream, my voice echoing as powerfully as possible. When the parents burst in, the knife had vanished. Brandon had forcefully tossed it onto the bed. He managed to persuade them that he had been sleepwalking. Mrs. Joseph cast me an irritated glance, as if to communicate her disbelief at my fussiness. I gestured towards the knife handle protruding from beneath the bed, imploring them to trust my words. Mr. Joseph knelt down, extracted it, and presented it to Brandon. He simply smiled and remarked that he had never encountered it before. Naturally, they placed their trust in him. I informed them that my door had been secured, so he must have managed to unlock it, but they insisted that was not the case. Absurdity. I experienced a profound sense of solitude. I was all alone. I was at a loss for what to do. A choice was made on my behalf, for better or worse. The following morning, Mrs. Joseph summoned me to the living room and accused me of stealing her jewelry. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion until she revealed a pearl necklace that was entirely unfamiliar to me. She informed me that she had discovered it in my purse, which she was grasping in her other hand. I implored her to trust me, to understand that I hadn't taken it, yet there was nothing I could utter to sway her belief. Brandon lingered in the hallway, a smile playing on his lips. I was certain it was him. I was let go immediately. The following day, I took a flight back to France. I was astounded by how effortlessly Brandon had shattered my existence. For months that followed, I found myself engulfed in deep sadness. I believed I had squandered my sole opportunity to live in the U.S. and dreaded that I might never have another chance. Luckily, I made my way back to the States a few years later and continue to reside here. I possess a great work and wonderful companions. I occasionally find myself reflecting on Brandon. I can only envision the malevolent individual he has developed into. For many individuals, embarking on a journey solo can be daunting, and rightly so. For some reason, it has never really troubled me all that much. I've always embraced my independence and outgoing nature, making it easy for me to connect with new people. It's likely one of the reasons I chose to become an au pair. I have always aspired to become a child psychologist. I believe that one of the issues facing our world could be addressed if children received improved parenting and appropriate guidance. Additionally, I've always had a desire to immerse myself in America, so taking on the role of an au pair was something I genuinely thought about. I hail from Germany, specifically a quaint little village just outside of Cologne. Many Americans are unfamiliar with it, so when asked about my origins, I typically just mention Germany. That approach simplifies things. Before you say anything, I have confidence that my English is quite good, or at least that's what I've been told. It has improved significantly since moving to the U.S., and many people are often quite impressed by it. My father hails from the U.K. and went to great lengths to make sure my English was as proficient as my German, if not superior. I'm uncertain whether they're available here in the U.S., but I had an electronic dictionary while growing up that also functioned as a translator. I recall playing with it a lot when I was younger, inputting words and translating them alongside my dad. I used to read voraciously when I was younger, and I believe that certainly contributed to my growth. My host family resides in an affluent suburb in Northern California. Their abode is incredible. One might assume that residing here could feel isolating, Yet the agency excels at fostering connections among nearby au pairs, allowing me to quickly bond with several girls from the neighboring areas. My closest companion here is an American girl named Jennifer. She is exceptional. She resembles me, though she has a bit more volume and stands a bit taller. Since the moment we crossed paths, we've been utterly inseparable. We are united in our purpose, engaging in our tasks, discovering new horizons, and striving to maximize our experiences while overseas. A large college campus is located nearby, and it essentially serves as the only reasonable option for going out that doesn't require a $100 Uber ride. The fraternity and pub scenes there are quite enjoyable, so that's where we typically spend our weekends. It seems that many of the guys are instinctively attracted to us due to our accents. And the international aspect certainly takes us a long way. Getting into frat parties is said to be quite challenging without being part of sorority around here, but we seem to manage just fine. The nightlife in this area is significantly more enjoyable. However, our cherished location is a pub known as Tap. I've observed that people in America enjoy assigning themes to their evenings. Taco Tuesday, Wine Wednesday, really, any reason to indulge on a weekday, right? It's somewhat amusing. Tuesdays bring the greatest joy of the week for Jenny and me. This tale unfolds on one of those nights. A few months after my arrival in the U.S., I found myself at the bar, waiting for drinks for Jenny and me, when a tall guy with curly brown hair approached me and said, "You're from Germany, correct?" That really caught me off guard. People rarely guess my German heritage. European, certainly, but not specifically German. I don't possess particularly distinctive German features, so whenever someone manages to guess my nationality, it truly captivates me. I departed and acknowledged his correctness, and he presented himself as Sebi, wearing a self-assured smile. We conversed for some time, and it all felt quite effortless. I'll confess, I often find myself being approached quite frequently when I go out. I'm fit, and I'm aware that I have a certain appeal, yet the way guys approach me tends to be rather predictable and cliched. Sebi experienced a sense of change. The deeper our conversation went, the clearer it became that he was genuinely interested in me as an individual rather than merely trying to flirt. He had a wealth of interesting insights into German culture, which was something I truly appreciated about him. Many Americans I encounter seem to have limited knowledge of the world beyond their borders, so it was refreshing to engage in conversation with someone who is well-traveled, intelligent, and cultured. We chatted and shared some laughs for a bit longer before I brought him over to meet Jenny. He smiled and beckoned his friend over, a young man of Asian descent who introduced himself as Hunter. He and Jenny instantly connected. Overall, it was an enjoyable experience. As the evening drew to a close, Sebi requested my number, and I handed it over without a moment's pause. A few days later, Sebi extended an invitation for dinner. Upon arriving at his place, I anticipated that he would have dinner reservations lined up or something similar, but to my surprise, he was busy preparing a pasta dish for us in the kitchen. He had a charming sweetness about him. I found myself assisting him in preparing the meal, and he uncorked a bottle of wine for us to enjoy. I had an amazing time that I found myself staying over at his flat. The following morning, I awoke and took a closer look at his room. In contrast to the typical college apartments, it was remarkably tidy. He lacked any posters or conventional decorations, instead opting for a collection of landscape images. The walls were adorned with numerous square photographs, each one a striking black and white image. Castles, cities, and countryside views. They all appeared strangely recognizable. I rose and examined them more intently, noticing that each one bore a printed location. All of them hailed from Germany. Each and every one, except for an image of Monte Carlo, Monaco. Sebi had already woken up by then, so I turned to him and playfully asked if he had a fascination with German architecture. He chuckled and shared stories about his father's collection of aerial photographs, from which he had selected some of his favorites. I strolled back to his bed and noticed additional pictures hanging above it. My jaw truly dropped when I saw that one of the pictures was a breathtaking landscape of my village, captured from above. The location was about 20 minutes away from my home. I shared this with him, and he became quite enthusiastic, remarking on what a wild coincidence it was. I was utterly astonished. The chances of that happening were incredibly low. He subsequently inquired about my hometown, and I was pleased to provide answers to his numerous questions. In the weeks that followed, Sebi and I found ourselves spending a considerable amount of time together. During the week, I was busy with work while he attended his classes. However, we made it a point to enjoy our weekends together, along with our Tuesday outings. Everything was fantastic. He was a kind soul who ensured I felt at ease and was having a good time whenever we went out. He was also very kind to my friends, which I truly valued. His companion Hunter revealed himself to be somewhat peculiar, however. Whenever taken off by Fisher played, he would, without fail, begin to strip right in front of Jenny. One night, Sebi found himself quite inebriated, far more so than he typically would. While he escorted me to his flat, he rambled endlessly about his admiration for German women and his long-held desire for a German wife. At one point, he mentioned that he had always dreamed of marrying an au pair, believing that foreign girls excel at caring for children. I dismissed it as just some odd fantasy, yet that was the first thing he did or said that truly unsettled me. Clearly not a deal-breaker, as he had been flawless up to that point. However, that was when he first invited me out for dinner. He brought me to this Italian place and mentioned he chose it because they offer a variety of vegetarian options, which was thoughtful, but I never mentioned that I was vegetarian. I offered him a small smile and teasingly inquired how he figured out I was vegetarian, to which he replied that he had seen it in one of my Instagram posts. That calmed me for the remainder of the dinner, but later when I returned home, I recognized the only mention of it was from years back, and I post frequently, so you need to scroll quite a distance to find it, not to mention decipher the caption I had used. Moreover, it's worth noting that all my posts date back to a considerable time ago in Germany. The next time I stayed over, while Sebi was asleep, I quietly unlocked his phone. I recalled his password. He hadn't been particularly cautious about concealing it. What I discovered in there was revolting. In his camera roll, there existed a folder named Wife, which included images from my social media spanning several months, featuring posts, captions, tag locations, and even snapshots of old stories I had forgotten about. His Notes app was even more disappointing. It contained English translations of my old posts, along with a rough schedule of when and where I would go out, all based on my Instagram story posts. Inside, there was content related to my hometown, Germany, and my interests, all derived from my Instagram, if you can imagine that. However, the most troubling discovery I made on his phone was an image of my driver's license. All at once, everything overwhelmed me. On the second night of my adventures in America, I found myself at a frat party where, to my dismay, I lost my wallet containing my ID. That's how he discovered my Instagram. That was the way he understood it all. Everything about me, where I came from, my interests, my birthday, wasn't a matter of coincidence. He had orchestrated it all. A lengthy and graphic message detailed his disturbing intentions towards me, a topic I prefer to avoid discussing. I had no idea who the person in those messages was. I could no longer bear to gaze upon it all, so I gathered my belongings and quietly slipped out of his flat, leaving no trace behind. Unfortunately, I failed to capture any photos as proof. Throughout the entire drive back to my host family's house, my hands trembled uncontrollably. Germans prioritize privacy with great seriousness. I experienced a wave of nausea. My au pair profile was set to private, but what about my ID? He possessed my complete name, and with that knowledge, I realized he could uncover anything. I was wide awake throughout the night. I hoped he hadn't managed to uncover my host family's address. The following morning, my phone was inundated with messages. They all came from Sebi, inquiring about my whereabouts, the reasons for my departure, and whether I had accessed his phone. I sent him one last message, letting him know that if he ever attempted to reach out to me again, I would involve the authorities. After that, I cut off all communication with him. In the days that followed, I found myself engulfed in a constant state of anxiety, fretting that he might appear at any time. I set my Instagram to private, secured everything, and made a close friend story for when I stepped outside, just in case he attempted to track me down once more. Fortunately, he hasn't appeared yet, and it's been roughly 3 months since I last received any word from him. Yet, I find myself unable to shake this feeling. A knot forms in my stomach at the thought that he knows my host family's address and that he's scheming something. I sincerely hope our paths do not cross again, but I will provide updates should anything else occur. Update: I had hoped to avoid this, but over the past few weeks, I've observed the same silver car driving up and down my host family street, occasionally just sitting across from their house. He has attempted to contact me using phony phone numbers and Instagram accounts, all within the identical period. The messages consistently invite me to engage, yet I have chosen not to reply to any of them. Everything here provides me with cause to suspect that he is aware of my location, and that I may be at risk. I'm preparing a case to present to the police, but I've heard that they often don't take this kind of matter very seriously. Fortunately, my time as an au pair is coming to an end shortly, which means I'll be returning to Germany before long. This occurred a couple of years back. Since childhood, I've dreamed of living in Europe. It has always been my aspiration, an enduring aspiration. Above all else, my desire was to engage with children. I've always had a knack for them, and I realized from a young age that I wouldn't find true satisfaction in life unless my work encompassed nurturing or educating children in some way. When I discovered the opportunity to become an au pair in France, where I could apply my high school French and immerse myself in a family environment, it felt like everything was aligning perfectly. The decision was challenging. Coming from Canada, the relocation was significant, yet France offered. There are advantageous visa opportunities available for Canadians, and this presented an ideal opportunity to enhance my French skills. Canada's alternate language. Additionally, I had some acquaintances in Paris, ensuring I wouldn't be completely isolated during my time there. However, finances posed a challenge. I lacked family support. I won't delve into the reasons, as that's personal. Let's just say I was navigating this journey alone. I wasn't able to spend on one of those pricey agencies, so I opted for a complimentary au pair website instead. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could do. That's how I formed a connection with Leah. Leah's mind was clear and direct. She required assistance with her 2 children while her husband was away for work. She appeared delightful, exceptionally courteous, and incredibly amiable. During our video calls, she promptly referred to me as Sherry and Mabel, which felt distinct from home, yet in an endearing, nurturing manner. She inquired extensively about my experiences, my interactions with children, and my views on family life, yet she revealed little about her own circumstances. Yet, she sensed authenticity. I had faith in her. The only aspect that seemed amiss was the children. I requested to meet with them during our calls multiple times. Leah consistently found an excuse for not participating. One was resting, the other was attending school, or they were enjoying a play date with a friend. She assured me that I would meet them the moment I arrived. It felt somewhat unusual, yet I assumed I would encounter them again before long. Leah provided me with a formal agreement. All details appeared in order, and we reached a consensus on my start date. I secured my flight, gathered my belongings into a suitcase, and bid farewell to Canada. Upon my arrival at Charles de Gaulle, Leah was absent. I was taken aback by that. Based on all I had gathered, it seemed that the majority of host families welcomed their au pairs at the airport. But then my phone buzzed. Leah sent me a message, letting me know she was caught in traffic and directing me to the side drop-off area where she would meet me. I recall utilizing Google Translate for her message, as it seemed she was arranging for someone else to collect me, and I wanted to confirm my understanding. I was correct, and that left me feeling perplexed and somewhat uneasy. Regardless, I adhered to her guidance. A few moments later, a car pulled up, and a woman stepped out, perhaps in her late 40s, sporting short blonde hair and a radiant smile. She bore no resemblance to Leah whatsoever. She presented herself as Leah's cousin and mentioned that you must be Leah's au pair. She dispatched me to fetch you. I paused. There was an unsettling feeling right from the start. I inquired if I could speak with Leah, and proceeded to unlock my phone. She informed me that Leah was likely still on the road and reassured me that she would be at home waiting for me. I reached out to Leah, but it went directly to voicemail. It didn't even ring. The woman repeatedly assured me that I would be all right, her face illuminated by a broad smile. Feeling a mix of confusion and exhaustion from the flight, I wondered what I was supposed to do. Was I meant to just stand there in the airport indefinitely? I followed her instructions and got into the car. The woman maintained an unceasing flow of conversation as we drove along. She inquired about my flight, my life in Canada, and whether I was looking forward to starting my new job. However, when I attempted to redirect the conversation towards Leah or the children, she dismissed it, merely stating that I would love them and that I would see them soon. I began to feel increasingly troubled by the entire situation. She exuded a certain refinement, an eagerness to engage me in conversation while skillfully avoiding any real answers. The landscape beyond started to transform. I had the address in Google Maps, but the route we were taking didn't align. We were moving away from the suburbs and into what appeared to be an industrial zone. Panic began to set in. I experienced a sensation akin to being taken against my will. I inquired straightforwardly about her destination, and she replied with a casual tone, referring to it as a shortcut, once more emphasizing that Leah was waiting for us. I sensed the color leave my cheeks. I realized then that she was not being truthful. I requested her to return me to the airport, yet she remained silent. I informed her that I would contact the authorities if she refused to return me to the airport, and she advised me to calm down, but I was not backing down, no matter what I expressed. She continued to reiterate her points about Leah and maintained that I was overreacting. The next moment, the vehicle decelerated. I flung the door open and leaped onto the pavement. The woman remained where she was, not driving away. Instead, she merely regarded me as if I were the one behaving irrationally. I reached out to my mom, who advised me to distance myself from the car, find a safe spot, and seek assistance. While conversing with my mom, I glanced through the windscreen and observed a woman on her phone, speaking quickly in a language unfamiliar to me. It was neither French nor English, that much is clear. I couldn't dismiss the instinct that she was conversing with Leah. There wasn't another car in sight, but under no circumstance was I getting back in that vehicle. At last, the driver's side door swung open, and the woman stepped towards me. I shouted that I was on the phone with the police, and that actually made her stop. In silence, she returned to the car, tossed my suitcase onto the road, and then drove away swiftly. I captured the license plate as she drove off, yet I was on the brink of tears, my mom still on the line. I found myself hitchhiking to a friend's house. I truly can't imagine what I would have done without that choice. My friend's family assisted me in reporting everything to the police, and ultimately, they even offered to help me with a fare back to Canada, for which I was immensely grateful. In due course, they provided me with the latest information relayed by the police. It seems that there was no registered au pair family under Leah's name. The number Leah utilized was prepaid and untraceable. Every image of the children was sourced from the internet. All the people I've spoken with about this say the same thing. I was just moments away from being trafficked. The most unfortunate aspect of the entire situation was the money I squandered on those plane tickets, leaving me with lasting emotional scars. Reflecting on the past, I realized the fortune I possess. I stood on the brink of something dreadful, something so unsettling that I could hardly allow myself to envision it. The entire scenario was meticulously planned from beginning to end, and had I not followed my instincts, I might not be here to share this tale. After a considerable period, I finally returned to France, this time via a reputable agency. I aspire to ultimately meet the residency requirements and attain permanent citizenship here.